Hi there, my name's Eric Francis Coppolino, the editor of Planet Waves and the host of Planet Waves FM. And I am here today with some information about Chiron. This is part of the art of becoming. This is an introduction to Chiron, and I'm planning to make this available to all readers, including those who haven't purchased The Art of Becoming, which is the 2018 annual reading, because this is just introductory material and it's not directly related to transits, but that's pretty important information about Chiron. And one of my concerns is that Chiron is going to be coming into focus this year. It's going to be entering Aries, so it's going to be prominent on the Aries point, which is in a kind of a natural magnification of Chiron, and then also it would seem pretty likely there's going to be a lot of astrological commentary on Chiron, and there's quite a bit of misinformation out there and misunderstanding. A lot of people have gotten their information on Chiron off of the internet, and that's not necessarily that good. So I want to just talk a minute about what Chiron is and how it came into being, kind of a brief synopsis. And by the way, I've written plenty about Chiron. There is a link off of members.planetwaves.net. It's an old-style website. You scroll down the right-hand margin. Maybe we'll move it up to the top for this or make it more available. But anyway, I have just Google my name and Chiron, and you will come up with many articles that I've been putting on the internet, perhaps over the past 15 years. And, I have learned a lot about Chiron from my teachers and from reading and from firsthand experience, and of course from working with Chiron in the charts of untold hundreds of clients. So what is this thing? Well, in 1977, a guy named Charles Kowal, who worked for, at the end of his life, he worked for JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, I believe. But at that point, I'm not sure who he was working for, but he was an astronomer, a professional astronomer, and he discovered an object out in an orbit that nobody had ever seen before. And that orbit was in between Saturn, which takes about 29 years to go around the sun, and Uranus, which takes about 84 years to go around the sun. And there was not anything known to be in that band or area of space till he discovered Chiron. And by the way, he discovered Chiron in the sign Taurus, and this was taking place in 1977. Now, this was first of all, this was touted by the press as the discovery of a planet, right? So it got a lot of attention, and among the people whose attention it got was astrologers who took this as an important discovery because nothing really had been, besides an asteroid, had been discovered since 1930 when Pluto was discovered. So this was a very exciting kind of modern harbinger of something new. And something quite unusual happened that had never quite happened before, which is that astrologers teamed up and pretty quickly developed delineations of this new object, and worked on getting some pretty good information out there at the beginning. Two of the first books came out in the very early 80s. One was by somebody called Ermini Lantero, called The Continuing Discovery of Chiron. And then a guy named Zane Stein, right around the same time, published Essence and Application, A View from Chiron. So within a couple of years, there were books about Chiron. Contrast that with Pluto. It took nearly 50 years for the first book in English to come out about Pluto. It took 40 years for a pamphlet to come out about Pluto, written by Isabel Hickey. She put a little pamphlet out and had some pretty kind of forward-thinking stuff for the 1970s, considering people were not even using Pluto that much in the 60s and 70s. They knew that it was there. It was a new factor, much less familiar to most astrologers than Chiron is today, from what I know. I wasn't a practicing astrologer back then, but that's my impression, and it was hard to find out anything about it. Certain very forward-thinking people like Dane Rudyard were looking at Pluto very early on. Like, for example, in the early 1960s, Aleister Crowley was looking at Pluto in the 1940s. So there were some people who were kind of forerunners. But it was a long, slow phase in until finally Jeff Green wrote the book Pluto, Evolutionary Journey of the Soul, and that comes out around 1985, right around the same time as Barbara Hand Clow's book, probably the most famous book about Chiron, which used to be called Chiron, Rainbow Bridge Between the Inner and Outer Planets. And a new branch of astrological thinking was begun that was very influential in the way that astrology thought of itself for quite a long time, even though the acceptance of Chiron by most astrologers took many more years. Then there's still a good few today who don't use Chiron or who are working with a fairly limited range of understanding of what this point is about. So it was discovered officially in 1977 when whatever entity keeps track of all these pictures, whether it's the Minor Planet Center, which I don't think existed at the time, or the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. This is one fact I don't know, is who keeps the files. But they looked back in the files and they found what's called a pre-discovery photo of Chiron in 1895, but it was not identified. It was just in the files, and no one kind of noticed that it was moving. Now, what's so interesting about the year 1895 is that that was the year that a person named D.D. Palmer discovered chiropractic. So Chiron is first spotted in 1895, and then Dr. Palmer develops a method of healing that uses the hands on the body in the same year. Made the discovery, healed a person of their deafness, a janitor in the building where he was working, and he just adjusted his spine, and suddenly the guy who had previously been deaf was no longer deaf. The word Chiron comes from an ancient Greek root which means one who has hands. So that's the thing. And Chiron is a centaur, half horse, half man. He's a man on top and a horse on the bottom. And this hybrid is a reflection of what Kowal was thinking when he named Chiron, which is that Chiron itself was this hybrid of planet, asteroid, and comet. And so he names it for a thing that is in itself a hybrid and gave it the first astrological keyword. Now, astronomers don't usually do that, but Kowal described Chiron as a maverick, and a maverick is something that is different or that refuses to conform. And Chiron comes up as an important factor in the chart, describing a place where we usually refuse to conform, where we're different, where we do our own thing and live our own way. All right, so the other important factor about Chiron from a historic standpoint is that it emerges in the 1970s when there was a growing consciousness of the holistic principle. It was a big deal in the 1970s, and many forms of healing were becoming popularized, and there was a rebellion that probably started in the 1950s or so, and it picks up momentum in the 1960s, and then by the 1970s, it's pretty popular that there are other approaches to healing besides conventional allopathic medicine. And so Chiron brings this idea into the astrological chart for the first time. So astrology, though it is a rather holistic art, because if you look at an astrology chart, you can see that it's a circle, first of all, not a linear device, and further, the elements of that circle, which are the houses and the signs, describe every factor of life that there is. They describe all of existence, and if there's some part of existence that can't be described, it's usually pretty easy to ascribe that to a house. So things like television were invented after astrology, but you can fit television into the third house and the ninth house, for example, or different theories about that. But it's a communication medium, and local TV would be the third house, and national or international TV would be the ninth house. So it's easy to fit that. Ninth house is publishing, third house is writing, and so there's a similarity, and you can kind of fit it into the concept. Okay, so Chiron brings the holistic principle into the chart, and it's very exciting, and astrologers are interested in this. Not all astrologers, but a core group led by a guy named Al Morrison, and then Zane Stein got involved very early on as well, and Zane Stein had a knack. He's still alive down in Australia or New Zealand. He reached out to Brian Marsden at the International Astronomical Union and was given an ephemeris. So it starts with the ephemeris, and the ephemeris is the thing you can use to figure out where a planet is in the chart. Once they knew that, they could start doing research. And this is all going on in the early 1980s. All right, so with that background, let's talk a little bit about Chiron. And I want to give three examples of incomplete, misleading delineations of Chiron. So you can get an idea of what I think an unhelpful way to describe Chiron is. First of all, one is the wounded healer. This is a common phrase that is bandied about, and I don't really know many people who can even describe what that means. Every person has some sense of injury. Every person has healing gifts, and there is a correlation between the injuries that we suffered and the gifts that we bring. This is true for everyone, and it can appear many places in the chart, not just Chiron. And it's at best an incomplete way to describe Chiron, and it's a common one. Two others that I've heard recently. Someone recently wrote to me and said that she read on a blog somewhere that Chiron is the wound that never heals. This is a terrible delineation of Chiron, because not only can the whatever injury Chiron is associated with heal, it often does so in a brilliant way and creates something that is beyond what would be possible otherwise. The idea of a wound that never heals is more accurately ascribed to the asteroid Psyche, but it is a state of mind. It's not a state of physical truth or the reality of a situation. It's just a state of mind, and that state of mind is the thing in itself that needs to be looked at and addressed and healed. Another bad delineation of Chiron that I heard recently, it is the point of greatest wounding and the point of greatest healing. Again, a similar thing. Now, in some limited way that is correct, but it's a very narrow way of looking at a point in astrology that is more crystalline in nature. I have a little crystal ball on this desk, but I'm not sure I can find it. But we've all seen crystalline structures. Here's a beautiful rock from my friend Laurel, and if you study this, you will see that it is infinitely faceted. That it is reflecting light, no matter no matter which way you turn it, it reflects light in a different way. And that is a little bit like Chiron. It will look a little bit different to everyone. It will feel a little bit different to everyone, and it is unhelpful to describe it in a simplistic, reductionist way, which I find is done a lot with minor planets. And there's this expectation that they're just supposed to be this easy thing to describe, and you kind of you punt once and it goes right between the goalposts, and that's it. So this is especially true of delineations that are a series of words. It's this, and this. When you have a series of words, you don't have a complex relationship between subject and movement. You just have a bunch of words that seem to exist outside of context, like it's like a kind of a verbal Rorschach test, and you kind of put them together any way that you want. So while there can be and often is some kind of an injury associated with the Chiron placement in the chart, it's not fair to call it the point of greatest wounding. There can be other things that happen in people's lives that are more difficult and not necessarily reflected in their Chiron placement. Or you have to look at something else and see what that is. And by the way, one of the ways to delineate Chiron that I'll be doing in the second video is to look at your Chiron transits. You have to look at Chiron as a thing in motion, not a thing that is standing still in the chart. An astrology chart. This chart's my first horoscope ever in April of 1995. Wow, that's a long time ago. Okay, so these things look like they're standing still, but actually every point in this chart is moving, and what we have is a snapshot in time. And Chiron in particular yields its secrets more willingly. God, that is bright. One flaw of using the built-in camera is that it's impossible to adjust the f-stop, and so we get that burnout right around that side of my face there. And apart from getting a big proper video setup, I'm not quite sure what to do about that, but I think it can dim it out like that. All right, so I lost my train of thought there. Chiron in motion. If you look at Chiron's transits through a person's life, then you get an understanding of what's going on with Chiron. From the fixed point in the chart, you can't really tell very much. But so when I start writing horoscopes, Chiron is opposite my sun, for example, and then you would look at if you wanted to kind of trace the story of a career or a person's life, you look at when Chiron reaches what's called the quadrature alignments. It goes to the quarter and the opposition in the second quarter, and then back to the conjunction or the Chiron return. And that story that the client tells begins to give you a more complete picture of what this thing is about. So in general, though, let's consider, I've got kind of 6 points that we can look to Chiron for information for. And remember that these points represent a process that goes on over time and not a fixed quality. There's a really big difference between the two. All right, so the first thing I have on my list is the quest for wholeness, and that's part of the holistic principle. Where Chiron exists in a chart, people will be looking for where they are a whole person, and they will seek to cultivate a sense of completion around where their Chiron transit is. I mean, to give one example, I have Chiron in a part of my chart intimately related to my career. And I certainly seek wholeness through my career and through my studies. All right. Second, going back to Charlie Kowal's keyword, the Maverick, Chiron is where we strive to be different. It's where we stand out. It's where we cannot help but stand out. The aspects to Chiron and the transits will help fill in the story about that standing out process and how well it goes, how difficult it is. But it is a place where we are looking for the courage to be different. The Maverick. Third, it is a point of high awareness in the chart, and that also includes the Chiron, please be darker, thank you, the Chiron transits in the chart. I'm going to hold this paper up so that the picture looks good. Chiron transits in the chart for that process of standing out and of being different. But that's point 2. Point of high awareness. Pardon me. I'm a little tired. I've been working very hard. Point of high awareness. So one of the interesting things about Chiron is that it can stand out of the chart with the impact of the sun, the moon, or the rising sign. Depending on who you are, depending on your Chiron placement, it can really have a lot of energy gathered around it, and it's surprising. I mean, for people who know their chart without Chiron, adding Chiron to the chart can be like adding the other half of the chart. Suddenly, it can complete an aspect pattern and like explain a lot of things, because if it's not there's definitely something missing, and if you have a need to, for example, stand out as an artist, but you don't know you have Chiron in the 5th house, you might think there's something wrong with you for wanting to stand out as an artist. Once you figure out that Chiron's in the 5th house, you realize, that's natural. Or if you like to have a lot of diverse sexual experiences, Chiron in the 5th house is, will lead you to connect your curiosity to your sexuality. So part of that high awareness is Chiron can be a place where you bring a lot of curiosity in your life. Curiosity is a kind of hunger for knowledge and for experience, right? And so that is one that Chiron brings, and it's connected with awareness. Another really important point that Chiron brings, and one that is almost always overlooked, is that of mentorship, of teaching and learning. Chiron was himself a teacher. He was a mentor to many of the great heroes of I believe the Hellenic era, people like Heracles and Achilles, Jason. He goes way back in ancient Greek history and was the teacher of medicine to Asclepius, the god of medicine. And there are probably hundreds of minor figures in Greek mythology and just ordinary folks who never made it into the official stories who were students of Chiron. He spent a lot of his life teaching and was devoted to teaching, but that teaching was a one-on-one process. And so what happens when someone has a prominent Chiron in their chart is that they tend to teach. And it's also a place where you study and learn. Now, there is an association between the teaching, the learning, and the study, and the practice of healing where Chiron is concerned, because that is a primary orientation. Chiron was taught medicine by Apollo, the god of medicine, Apollo, the god of the sun, and then taught Asclepius, the god of medicine, how to do medicine. So Chiron is a kind of a master teacher. I mean, imagine that he teaches. Chiron, the god of medicine, was taught medicine by someone in Greek mythology, and that someone was Chiron. That's pretty amazing. And so when we think about this teaching element of Chiron as one of the most important elements of Chiron, in existence. The last point I have on my list here is that Chiron represents for many people a long quest or struggle. So things involving Chiron can take a long time, and then they can suddenly come to fruition. One of the properties that Chiron has is to drop in and out of awareness. Sometimes it's very prominent in someone's chart because of certain transits that it's making, and then sometimes it drops back from prominence because it's not making transits, or, for example, there's not transits happening to a person's Chiron, but by other planets. Saturn conjunct your Chiron or opposite your Chiron, to give one example. With Chiron about to complete a trip around the zodiac and leave Pisces and enter Aries, a process which happens between April of 2018 and February of 2019, and Chiron basically dancing around the Aries point, the first degree of the zodiac, all of that time. That would count for everyone as a time when Chiron is prominent in the chart. And we're going to see that, I think, in terms of the discussion of Chiron changing signs. And by the way, Chiron hasn't changed signs since 2010. On April 20th, 2010, Chiron entered Pisces, and that was a pretty big time in history. For example, the Deepwater Horizon oil rig blew up the day that happened, which certainly fits the bill on much of what I've said about Chiron. And with Chiron in Pisces, of course, the thing that was most affected was the ocean, and by extension, all the creatures in the ocean. Chiron can have the function of what, if you read a book called Bringers of the Dawn, channeled by Barbara Marciniak, of a system buster. Chiron will push systems and find the weak link in the system. And when that weak link is exposed, it had best be fixed. And Chiron transits will tend to expose the weak link in your personal, spiritual, psychic, or biological system, and then will be the place that you need to devote some attention to. One last thought. One of the most common things about Chiron, which does relate to the concept of sustaining an injury of some kind, is that it can represent a shamanic injury, a kind of a ritual wound or something for a purpose. And the purpose turns out to be a place where energy is concentrated and where learning is concentrated. And in that respect, the description of point of greatest wounding, point of greatest healing is somewhat accurate, but it's necessary to take in the entire picture with Chiron and find out the way in which the person is manifesting Chiron. And the only way to do that is to spend some time with the person you're working with, or spend some time with yourself, and kind of conduct an extended interview and listen for the facets of Chiron that apply to that person. For some people, Chiron is a very difficult point in their chart, and they can repeatedly have difficulty in their life when there are transits to Chiron or being made by Chiron. Other people tend to just rise to the occasion and get stronger every time they have a Chiron transit. For most people, there is some blend, and when there is a powerful Chiron transit, there's often a healing crisis, which is a kind of a time when things get worse before they get better, or you go through an experience and you struggle and you gain, and then you go through another experience and you struggle and you gain, and you come out ahead. And again, where these patterns of flow and patterns of development are best discovered is by understanding Chiron as a thing in motion and not a thing standing still in the chart. And how you ferret that out is it's not a particularly difficult skill. The difficult skill with Chiron is hearing let's say the true story elements between the lines, or drawing inferences from what you or someone else is saying, and putting the whole story together. Basically, this is the challenge. And so it's better if you proceed with patience and with very few preconceived ideas about what Chiron is about. Though if you look it up in certain books, you're going to find something that is descriptive. It is still describing a thing that is standing still rather than a thing that is in motion. And Chiron is very much a thing in motion. All right, that concludes this particular message. In the next one, I'm going to have a chart available, and we'll look at the quadrature alignments of Chiron when it entered Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, and the last time it was in Aries in the 1960s. And we'll also talk a little bit about people who are having their Chiron return, which happens when you start to approach age 48, 49, 50, 51. Depending on how your chart is set up, it peaks around age 50, but then there's usually a warm-up, and then there is a kind of a cool-down and a journey. There's always a journey where Chiron is concerned. There's always some form of a quest. All right, so this video is part of The Art of Becoming, the 2018 annual edition of Planet Waves. As you may know from previous correspondence and communication, this is the first time that I am doing the Planet Waves annual edition while I am also writing a daily horoscope and the rest of my content stream. And so this annual is going to take a little bit longer, but the thing I'm not doing is I'm not shortening it, and I'm not cutting the quality. So I'm writing the same quality work that I have done for years, readings that are over 5,000 words long, and those take thought, they take reworking. So I am approaching the halfway point, and that's pretty good for everything that is that's going on, in my writing life and in the world around us. I do hope you're doing well, and it's always good to hear from you. And if you're just looking to reach out and make contact, Facebook is a good way to do that, whether you do that on the open, on my timeline, or send a private message. And I'm usually pretty easy to reach through my company. My phone numbers are all published, and the company numbers are, please be darker. Company numbers are always easy to find, and for example, call Ellen in my office, and we will get back to you. All right, thanks for listening. Thanks for being open-minded about Chiron. I'm interested in your thoughts and your feedback. Add them to the comments section on this YouTube video, or where this video appears on Facebook. All right, thanks, and bye for now.